Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And today we have Selam Debs.
Yes, the owner of Juici Yoga.
Selam is also an anti-racism educator. We have learned so much from her, and she's very generous with educating Marshall and I in this episode.
In this past year, I've been reading several articles about her, and also I've seen her on Rogers Television on a show called Diverse and Converse. So I've been very excited about talking to her.
Okay, let's get to it. Here's Selam Debs.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Do you enjoy Bonn Park podcast?
If so, we would really appreciate it if you
Leave a review.
like, rate, subscribe, but most importantly,
Share directly from the platforms.
with your family and friends. That's the best way to get the word out to everybody, and more people will get to see our show that way. So click those like buttons and share our show. Thank you.
Thanks.
On with the show. This is it. Bonn Park is supported by the St. Jacobs Farmers Market. The market is a community landmark of more than half a century and is the largest agricultural market in Canada. Whatever you crave, you'll find it there. Whether it's country classics like fresh apple fritters, cinnamon rolls, and Oktoberfest sausage on a bun. And the market also has a world of flavors to explore with Korean, Vietnamese, Egyptian, Haitian, and Mediterranean cuisines, among others. Want to cook at home? The market has fresh fruits and vegetables, quality meats and seafood, locally made cheeses and preserves, and oils and honey. Many of the food vendors offer pre-made frozen options that you can save for those busy nights where you want a healthy homemade meal but are short on time. The St. Jacobs Market remains open during the current stay-at-home order, with extensive safety precautions in place. Open Thursdays and Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. There are over 60 food vendors on site working hard to continue to supply you and your family with fresh and local products. And here's a word from Justina.
I love going to the market with my family on Saturdays. Follow St. Jacobs Farmers Market on Facebook, Instagram, and at stjacobsmarket.com.
We are supported by Deja's House of Patties. What better way to warm a winter night than with a taste of the Caribbean? Deja's is a new family-owned eatery serving up some of the most mouth-watering Jamaican patties in the Waterloo region. They offer spicy and mild beef patties, but they've got so much more too. Curry goat patties, kalalu and codfish patties, and patties with ackee, vegetable potato chickpea, and more. They've also got a must-try jerk chicken patty, spicy enough that you'll want to quench your thirst with tropical beverages like Jamaican ginger beer, island sodas, and mango and pineapple drinks. Deja's House of Patties is at 42 Bridgeport Road East in Waterloo, open every day. Check them out at houseofpatties.com and on Facebook and Instagram. Get a taste of the Caribbean sun delivered to your door with Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, or Uber Eats. Bonn Park is supported by Spoil the Dog Bakery. The name says it all. Spoil the dog. If you want to pamper your pooch with tasty, healthy treats, spoil the dog. If you want to be sure your best friend is eating nutritious, human-grade food, spoil the dog. Located in the beautiful village of St. Jacob, Spoil the Dog has been, well, spoiling dogs for 15 years. Google Spoil the Dog Bakery and check them out on Instagram and Facebook. Dogs spoil us with unconditional love and loyalty. So hey, spoil the dog. We are supported by The Hot Sauce Co. Spice up your cuisine with The Hot Sauce Co.'s signature sauces. Their habanero and mango hot sauce is a must-try, with flavors inspired straight from the Caribbean. If habanero is hotter than you'd like, try their milder peppers and pickles hot sauce, which features jalapenos and tomatillos. It's an explosion of flavor. Or, if you want to truly crank up the heat, their habanero and herbs hot sauce will warm you through even the coldest winter day. Find the Hot Sauce Co.'s signature sauces at Vincenzo's, Central Fresh Market, and La Fromagerie on Lexington. Visit thehotsauceco.com or follow them on Instagram and Facebook. Selam Debs, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sara and Marshall.
We're excited to talk to you. Thank you for answering my cold DM over Instagram. Hey, I've got this little show with my buddy Marshall. would you like to talk to us? Our show's about our community and living and working here, and your work is incredibly important. But I do want to start with talking about, so you're a yoga instructor, you're a brand ambassador, and you do very important anti-racism work. Let's talk about your yoga and your Juici Yoga studio.
Sure.
How long have you had that, and how did that come to be?
So yes, I wear many hats. I wonder how I even get an opportunity to sleep sometimes, but no, I'm making a lot of those changes and trying to create more balance. But yes, Juici Yoga Studio, I actually took over the studio. It used to be Community of Hearts Yoga, and the studio was there for over 10 years. And I did my teacher training. I walked away from the corporate world, and I was trying to kind of, find myself and find a new career. And yoga and meditation ended up really becoming a really important part of my life and my own kind of healing journey. As a single mother, I never thought that I'd ever be able to be an entrepreneur and create and design my own life, with a yoga studio and teaching and such. And so, but I did it. I kind of jumped out of the corporate world and then jumped into the entrepreneur world. And I used to teach yoga classes everywhere. Like anyone that was like, oh, I need a yoga teacher. I was like, oh, sure. So I would teach, 5 classes a day. And then eventually I realized that I really wanted to, look into ownership or own an actual studio space. And I found Community of Hearts Yoga, and me and the owner, Grace, we just became really good friends. And within actually our first conversation, she said, I'm actually moving to Papua New Guinea, and I'm actually looking for someone to take over the studio. The first day we actually physically met. And I was like, really? I was like, well, I'm actually looking for a studio. And it was kind of like kindred spirits. And we just put that into works within a couple of months. I owned a studio, even though I was going through a divorce, even though I had no money, even though it didn't make any sense how I was going to, first of all, buy a studio. And second of all, I had no background, or at least I thought, in managing and owning and, designing that space. But I found out really quickly that I think life had always prepared me for, what it would look like to be a studio owner and offer these practices to the community. And yeah, that's how it started.
And then I wanted to ask you about brand ambassadorship. And that is because our dear friend Marshall here doesn't social media, which is refreshing and wonderful all the same time.
And I didn't know what a brand ambassador was.
Did you look it up, or are you waiting for an explanation?
No, I'm waiting for
Okay, great.
I think I know.
Why don't you tell us what you think it is? This is fun.
Yes. So I think when you have a big brand like Lululemon, they look for somebody in maybe different communities who can promote their business in a more personal kind of way that's geared towards that community, and bring their skills and expertise to, rather than it just being this big giant company that
buys a billboard.
Yeah, buys a billboard and puts everything out in the same way.
I think you've got it
accurate. Yeah, that's
okay.
That's exact. You couldn't have said it better than myself. I think
good.
I'm gonna have to take that.
But truly, I hadn't heard that term before. Mm-hmm. And it must involve, at first when you get hired, just completely immersing yourself in this huge learning curve about what you're promoting.
Well, actually, it really isn't related to social media, actually. And it's actually not really related. I didn't actually have to go through a learning curve. I can't speak for all organizations, but I will say that Lululemon's vision and like how they, their platform for brand ambassadorship is like more, they focus on amplifying you. So they focus on really, first of all, yes, you do get, free clothes because you're wearing the clothing, in your job and the work that you do as a yoga teacher or, a fitness instructor. However, I found that it was really an authentic relationship. We didn't really communicate or have much online. It was more that we had relationships that we built. They offered me access to, I think, a broader community that I normally would not have had access to. I went to British Columbia to Banff for like an ambassador summit event for a couple of days where they sent me off for that kind of self-development. And then when I go into the store, like, it's like we're friends. It's more like we're family, we're friends, and they kind of amplify all the work that I do. And yes, I represent Lululemon as a brand, but it's never felt like an obligation. It's just kind of felt organic, and has really helped me to put Juici Yoga on the map, to get my voice out there a little bit more, and to kind of use their platform, but also they're able to build more like deeper relationships within the community, through accessing my community as well.
And what does that mean that they're amplifying your work?
So, I mean, we've done things, for example, at the Conestoga Mall at the store, when I first rebranded to Juici Yoga from Community of Hearts Yoga, they had like a Juici Yoga rebranding party in the store. And so I've taught yoga in the window, and like people, were able to show up to the store, and they're coming to buy clothes, but then they get a free class to come to Juici Yoga, and they got like a free Juici, cookie. And they've just done a lot to really support whatever it is that I'm doing. When me and my business partner, Carla, have hosted the Woke events, the Woke women and men events, they will like buy tickets to get their staff involved, or they'll promote the event that I'm offering. I've also, taught yoga and meditation sitting in the window of Conestoga Mall. Like I've actually like sat there and done meditation. And I remember this one weekend we were, basically what we did was we had me sit there in the window, and I was just meditating, and I was relaxed, wearing all Lululemon clothes. And then we had a chair in front of me and a sign that said, like, if you want to try like a 1 minute meditation, like 1-2 minute meditation. And so, people that were just in the mall, clients and customers would come in, and then I would kind of lure them in, and I'd, give them a little bit of essential oil, and we'd meditate for a minute or two. So I think it's been really authentic. It hasn't really been like online presence. It's more like building actual relationships within the community with people.
So this is really smart.
Oh yeah,
Lululemon.
Yeah.
I'll give it. I think you'll see the connection I'm making here. All year round in basically every city like this, there are little costume shops that work all year, and then they rely on Halloween, right?
Yes.
And then what happens is some big, huge pop-up Halloween store shows up that doesn't make any connection with the community. They're just there to sell Halloween stuff. And a lot of it comes from the States, and they're not. There's no effort to make any connection with that community. It just shows up and it'll take whatever vacant spot there is, and then they're gone, right? And if you ever need to return something, well, forget it. And these little costume shops really resent this, and they really hope that the residents of that community will support them and not go to that shop, because the little costume shop has been plugging away all year round. And anyways, I think that's really smart, because Lululemon would arrive at Conestoga Mall and then begin to give back to the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do have a store there. I don't know if you've been.
Oh, I've been
the store. They have a store there. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. No,
So
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have a store there. And so what happens is, instead of just coming in and just like selling clothes, that may be like overpriced and, not accessible for most people, I think they really try their best to build community and relationships. And they offer so many free events that people can come to. They even had yoga in the store every Sunday morning for a long time, and they move all the clothes racks away. So they find ways of connecting with community that's beyond just, the products. So I feel like they've kind of become integral here in KW.
Also, this isn't a Lululemon podcast, but I will say this attitude or sort of new format of brand ambassadorship is different than how this first started on social media. So when this first started, and Marshall, for your benefit, I will tell you, you would see something of somebody you follow, maybe somebody you admire, maybe an icon, somebody you look up to, and they would have a product, and you wouldn't know at first that it's an ad. It's a little sneaky. It's a little bit shady. It's a little sketchy. Yeah. And then eventually people were realizing that it wasn't being well received. And then they would say, well, this is an ad. And now there are rules around announcing that what you're up to is an ad. But this is different. This is getting right into the community and offering something back. And that's the advertisement. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast, that success in a community isn't just taking from and doing well. It is giving back to that community.
I absolutely agree. I think that that's how I've run my business always. That, some people will talk about sales and talk about how do we sell, how do we promote, how do we retain customers. But really, to me, I feel like, obviously that's necessary. Like, otherwise you can't run a business. However, my approach has always been, when I coach staff, that it really is authentically caring about the well-being of the folks that are coming into the yoga studio. So it like really is genuinely wanting to ensure that they are receiving the benefits that they need, that it's valuable to them. And it comes from that, like, building relationships. Like, I remember over the years before COVID, like I know hundreds of names. So students will come in and I'm like, hi, Sarah, hi, Amal, hi, Aliyah. Like I know them, and I also know a little bit of their story, and it's authentic. And yes, that brings sales, and yes, that brings revenue, but it really starts from that place.
I think it ties in nicely to Conestoga Mall too, because Conestoga Mall is a very forward-thinking, eco-friendly mall. It's you wouldn't necessarily read about it in a newspaper, but they've won all sorts of awards. They have one of the most progressive food courts when it comes to recycling. So I can see how this makes, and you can tell that Conestoga Mall has its own community of customers too. There's some people who are there every single day, right?
I never thought I would miss a mall ever. Malls aren't my thing, but man.
Oh, I would love to go to
I'd love to go to the mall right now.
No, I just said today, I said I would love to go to Conestoga Mall and walk around.
Just do a little walk around.
Yeah.
And just like side note, underwear isn't really something that I'm comfortable buying online. Like, I need to find out if it's the right pair. You know what I mean?
100%.
There's some things you need to touch and feel and hold up to yourself to see.
Absolutely. I've tried to buy things online. I never thought I would. And I've even gotten lost into the Instagram thing and once or twice and bought something, and something's come in the mail and I'm like, this is awful.
This is not what was advertised.
I like how you can see the totality of Lululemon. Like, when you stand outside, there's so much glass that you can see the entire store.
Yeah, that is a cool
And there's
feature.
a lot of stores in the mall that you just can't even, some of them are even just a little doorway that you
a little claustrophobic.
and turn
I
around.
think Lululemon's going to have to sponsor this episode.
I know. I was like, we're gonna have to cut something out. Not sponsored by Lululemon, but it could be. Call us. So we're talking about your yoga studio, and we're talking about the mall being closed. How has Juici Yoga survived during this time? What are you up to?
Yeah. So, when it happened initially in March, we could never have imagined. I think I was in denial at first and didn't.
We all were.
Yeah. There was a part of me that was like, no, that's not happening. It's not. And then it happened. And then it was like within 48 hours, I moved to virtual and had to turn my studio space into a virtual space, get the camera, all the things, the lighting, and basically turned it to a studio production place. I never thought I would do anything online in that capacity. I've always kind of been I've always pushed away, or I've had resistance around doing online things, but I was immersed in it. And it actually went really well initially because everyone was kind of panicking and needed, to find ways to still move and breathe. And connect.
Yeah.
Turn on our videos at the end and chat and talk. And we still do that with our virtual classes. But, oh, wow. Let's just say this, we're surviving. And my heart goes out to all, the small businesses that can't do something virtual or are trying to, move through this, especially those who offer massage and, but I would say we basically went down to making, 20% of our sales. Yeah. So you're kind of I've been paying out of pocket, but however, to me, it's important. I will do everything possible to maintain and try to keep Juici Yoga alive because of the fact that there are some clients that have just been we're staying, we're going to keep coming. This is a lifesaver. And we've actually attracted new students as well. So it's been tough. It's been difficult, but it's also what's helped me get through this experience because I was teaching yoga and teaching meditation and, caring about my staff and ensuring that they, were situated. And I think overall it's been difficult, but I would say that's less difficult than everything else that's been happening in society and the ways in which that was compounding the experience of COVID. I would say, I feel like I was resilient to be able to get through COVID, but I would say the compounding impacts of, the racial injustice and everything that was happening in the world, that was, I would say, is the part that was really, really hard to move through.
I'm glad you're surviving. We're thinking about small business all the time here.
I always think that during the best of times, I don't know how entrepreneurs don't lay there in bed at night and just stare at the ceiling, worrying. I can't.
Are you like, you're reading my mind?
I find it terrifying, the thought of starting a business. Just all the
well, especially a bricks and mortar, like having a physical space that you need to keep afloat right now.
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough, but I also feel like our community rallied behind us. Not to plug Lululemon again, but they supported also their ambassadors in some ways, and I was able to get a little bit of support in that way. So I think it's been difficult. It's been challenging, but I do feel that we're going to be able to like get over the hump. I'm trying to stay optimistic and feel like we will get there. And that's maybe just like the relentless positive person in me. But there are days where I do stare up and I go, how did we get here? How is this even happening? And like and I know that we'll never go back to normal. So I think I've let go of that idea. But I think we have built a new skill, which is virtual, yoga classes and meditation classes. And, we're reaching people everywhere, really. I've had family and friends from all around that have come to classes now. But yeah, my heart is going out to small business owners because we are all, we're in a predicament.
Mm-hmm.
And Juici is a great name. How did you settle on that name?
Juici Yoga. So Juici to me just felt like the word juicy feels like a really powerful, inclusive word. Like to me, when I think about like when you bite into a peach and like that experience, I really feel like the way that I teach yoga and meditation, a way a lot of the teachers teach at the studio, it's really rooted in like a really powerful practice that is creative and that is musical and that is, regardless of your body type, that is inclusive, regardless of where you come from, what race you are, what religion, what your identity is. I felt like Juici just represented that. And I do get that a lot. People ask me like, what is Juici? And I'm like, I don't know I can't say it. I don't have a elevator speech or pitch for it. It's like, to me, it's an embodiment. It's like embodying movement. And then once I decided on Juici, it was interesting. After that, I would be listening to podcasts or reading books, and I saw it all the time. Like people would describe things as like, that was such a juicy experience, or,
I've heard the word after a class, somebody will be like, oh, that was delicious. I'm like, I would not have thought of that word, but I get what you're saying.
Yes.
When it comes to teaching meditation, one of my favorite books is called The Mindful Writer by Dinty Timur. And he talks a little bit about monkey brain, or in the way that your thoughts can jump around. And I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who think that it would be a very difficult start to begin meditating and getting somewhere to a place where I can somehow calm those thoughts that are, again, like a monkey, I guess, bouncing around,
In my limited yoga experience, classes at the gym, I'm thinking, do you have like an intermediate class I can sign up for? Like I'm trying not to compile my grocery list or replying to emails in my mind during yoga. It's hard to quiet that.
Yeah, meditation. I think meditation is a really powerful practice, but I think, Marshall, when you're talking, the monkey brain really is an incredible example. But I would say that meditation should be like an embodied experience. Like if you don't meditate to like make your thoughts go away, because like then you're dead, right? Like if your thoughts are gone, you're probably not alive at this point. But I think the meditation is like an opportunity to get really still and to move out of like the unconscious way of thinking, like the default thinking, that kind of like amygdala part of the brain where you're in survival. And like you were saying, Sarah, where you're like, okay, what do I have to do? The things that, historically, if a lion historically was running after us, that's when we were like that was our level of survival. Now our survival is like, my groceries, do I have time to do this? I got to go to this meeting, and that constant stress on our bodies and our minds deteriorate our organs. They mess up our sleep, our immune system. So I think meditation is actually an opportunity to be able to center and ground yourself and kind of like not be insane, not be insane, just be like, to get clarity and be like, okay, what is actually happening right now in this moment, which requires thoughts, you still need thoughts to meditate.
I hear you talking about the stress and the impact that it has on your organs and on your body and on your mind. And even more so now, or in our modern world where we're living in abundance all the time. If you're lucky, you're fortunate enough to be living in abundance, and none of us are really moving as much as we should be right now. So that's even adding that extra layer of stress on that monkey brain part of you, right? That thinks that it's going to get somewhere by experiencing the stress, but like the famine and the rest doesn't come, right? We're still going down that track constantly.
Absolutely. Which is why we need the stillness. We need the pause, even though I think the busyness, it's addictive in our culture to stay busy.
The badge of honor.
Absolutely. And it's a part of this culture that, puts productivity over people and really looks down at rest and renewal. So I think it's like taking back your power, taking back your time, and your own sense of peace of mind, and realizing that, really health is wealth. So we have to start there. And I'm preaching to the choir. I'm talking to myself, because it's hard to at times to schedule or integrate that spaciousness into your day, because really, I think with COVID, I feel we're even busier sometimes, because we're not even doing that drive to get to a place. It's like meeting after meeting after meeting,
and you're reachable after hours.
Yeah, although I am not reachable after hours.
Good for you. Health is wealth. That's going to be my new motto. Health is wealth.
So I just learned the word intersections with regards to people's
intersectionality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I find it fascinating, and the way these different parts of ourselves overlap. And can you talk a bit about that? And everything we've talked about so far, I can see how there's a really nice kind of like a tapestry happening between how your work all interconnects. We're going to talk more about your other work. Can you talk a bit about that? How you see that in yourself?
Intersectionality, yeah, that was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and she basically, looked at the ways in which a person's identity intersects with many different social factors. So if you're looking at, I'm a woman, so that's one aspect in the way that I relate to the world and the world relates to me. But then I'm also a Black woman, so there's that aspect. But I'm also Ethiopian, there's also that aspect. I'm also cisgendered, so there's that aspect. I have a hetero experience in the world. I'm able-bodied. So I think when you look at the different intersections of, when you start to dissect and understand that, we start to understand that it's complex, that people are not just, you can't just look at a person and say, well, because you're a woman, this is your experience. We have to look at the different compounding factors in which would impact a specific person. So even though me and Sarah are both women, so then, but we still have the social economic factors. There's class, like how did you grow up? How did I grow up? What neighborhood did you grow up in? Who did you have two parents that were in the household? What was your experience in terms of race, racism, and all the different factors in which would, although we are both women, there's so many other, compounding aspects that we'd have to look at in order to ensure that, for example, Sarah has she has the experience within a job, for example, that where she feels like she's getting what she needs, and that I have the experience within a job or a service that I'm working within the health system, or so forth, in a way that serves my needs specifically.
We were talking to Jen Bassick last night, actually, Ward 5 counselor for Waterloo, and she used a great term that really opened my eyes, and she was talking about meeting people where they're at. So that intersectionality combined with meeting, like especially from a city council or regional point of view, meeting people where they're at, those two things have to coexist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think meeting people where they're at is not asking folks to be like you and not asking folks to assimilate into whatever worldview you have, right? It's like really recognizing the uniqueness and specific nature or experiences that person has had. Some people will say things like, you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but that really is impossible. Instead, meeting people where they're at means like you treat others how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated.
Or how you think that they should be treated. I want to talk about education. I also want to talk about the rest that we spoke about earlier, but the rest where it applies to the stress and the emotional
turmoil and toll that it might take on you to educate me. And for Marshall and I to recognize, okay, just by existing and who we are, that we are inherently racist and that we must know that. And I want to be educated, but I also want to be sensitive to the fact that it's not your job to educate me. Although in this case it is, because you do teach anti-racism, right? So, if we were here just talking about your yoga studio and your yoga practice and all that kind of stuff, that, that's a one side. But we are here to also talk about your anti-racism education. I'm going to tell a story that is
that was really well done.
Was it?
Yeah.
I usually stumble so much, even when I'm not talking about racism.
I appreciate how you explained that. That was really great. That's going to resonate with people.
I mean it. Yeah. I really do. I want to be sensitive to the fact too that every person of color that we have on our show doesn't have to explain their person of color experience to us. That's not, Black person of color or Indigenous people. That's not their job to explain that to us. But I also, I don't want to be fragile and beg to know, like, hey, how has that been for you? Unless it happens organically. Well, it's not great, but you have an impactful, powerful story about your first experience of racism in the KW area. KW is very white. It's getting to be more of a beautiful quilt like Canada, like we talk about, but it is very white. I was talking to a senior citizen, a woman who's an immigrant, but she's German, blonde hair, blue eyes. And she talks about immigrants as though they were a problem in this conversation. All those immigrants, it's the immigrants. I'm like, you're an immigrant, I am an immigrant, fourth generation, however many generations we've been here. We are not native to this area. And her response was, well, I assimilated. So, I'm not an immigrant. I'm doing the quote. Right. We used to have a sound for this. Doing the quote fingers, the air quotes.
Is there a certain day where you go from being an immigrant to being assimilated?
Well, that's
it's the door you walk through.
And that's where this conversation was leading. And I thought, well, that is 100% a type of racism that I'm not comfortable with. It's giving me goosebumps. It's not cool. Your skin color hasn't been part of what your problems and your experience have been. Just as Marshall and I, our skin color has never built a barrier for us. We have different barriers for different reasons, but our skin color has never been one of those reasons, or our English, like our language, has never been one of those reasons.
No.
So I guess getting back to it was, let's talk about your anti-racism education and how do we do better, right? We don't want to be allies. We want to be anti-racists, right? Mm-hmm. Tell me what to do.
Well, Sara, okay. So firstly, I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that, you have obviously taken some time to educate yourself on some level, because, understanding that it's not, a Black, Indigenous, or person of color's job to educate you, recognizing that that in fact, perhaps that's a part of their identity that they're not really interested in really speaking to you about when you're doing an interview is really key. And I've coached folks on that, where they've been like, well, I want to interview this person, but they're Black, but they just own like a shop. It's like, okay, so then just talk about the shop. unless they have a desire, I think it's important not to tokenize, Black, Indigenous, and people of color into being that source of education for white folks. And then, you touched on a really important story, which is that racism within Canada is often hidden because it's hidden behind these conversations that often don't come to light. Like what you shared right now, often people have brushed away and have been like, oh, that's just an older, woman that's just.
We say that all the time. Yeah.
They're older. They're from that generation, but it's actually really insidious, because if we unpack what that story means is that, first of all, that she doesn't see herself as an immigrant. She doesn't recognize her positionality, that she came here, part of a historical aspect of colonialism, of white folks coming to Turtle Island, to Canada, and actually, participating in the cultural genocide of Indigenous peoples and the complete erasing of Indigenous peoples on this land. And then it doesn't speak to the real privilege that she holds as being German, first of all, in this community, in this area. and that her language, even if she did speak another language or her parents spoke another language and spoke German, that actually wouldn't have also been a barrier. It actually still would fit under the umbrella of whiteness. And also how white, how Irish rather, and other European folks, Italians, have assimilated into whiteness, but also have benefited from that assimilation. Like there's a benefit that comes from being able to assimilate into a culture and to be able to move in a society in which you are considered superior, which you're considered human, individual, and the benchmark. And then when you look at other migrants or newcomers that come to Turtle Island, come to the stolen land, that they're considered the other, and that they face all of the barriers that come with being racialized, and English not being their first language, although they may speak 4 languages like my mother did, and still be treated as if they are, less human. Not to mention the fact that I think a lot of people are not aware of Canada's history. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand Canada's history, then it's easy to kind of like let those comments kind of fall off your shoulder. But when you know that Canada enslaved, Black people for 200 years, for 2 centuries, when we know that the cultural genocide of Indigenous folks, the 60s scoop, when we understand that segregation happened in Canada, when we understand that racism is actually very much a part of the fabric of this country, and that it's sometimes we cover it up with this idea of like multiculturalism and like, we're benevolent, we're better than the US, we're nice, but really that to me is it's a disservice, because we're not actually having the real conversations and addressing the truth of this country's origins.
Tell us about your story of your first experience with racism in the KW area. You came from Toronto.
Yeah, I moved here from Toronto, kicking and screaming. My mom moved here from Scarborough, and I grew up in Regent Park. Then we moved to Scarborough, to disinvested communities, of course, where my mom worked multiple jobs. And there were vibrant, beautiful communities where we had incredible, different cultures. But of course, we also were impacted by systemic oppression as we were in communities that were disinvested in. So my mom, in her eyes, was like, I'm going to move to KW to create a better life for us, for you and your sister. And this is going to be a safe community. And we're not going to have the issues that we had in Toronto in terms of, these impoverished areas that are systemically oppressive. And so coming to KW was really hard. It was a huge adjustment. I went from being around a lot of culture to being around a lot of whiteness, and not just whiteness, but an overt style of racism. And, I remember being on this bus. I believe I was 15 years old. I was in grade 10, and I was on this city bus going home. And this man who had like a shaved head was kind of fighting with this Hispanic Latinx boy on the bus. And he was young. He's probably my age. And, he was yelling at him, and the boy was trying to like stick up for himself, and nobody was saying anything. That was before cell phones. So no one had any distractions, but nobody said anything. And then I looked to the boy and I just said, listen, don't engage in this, because you're the one who's going to get in trouble. You're the one who's going to end up getting arrested. So just like go home, because he was trying to instigate him off the bus to fight. And so the boy was like, thank you. And he left. And I was left on the bus now with this man. And he and everyone else was there as well. And he looked at me and he said, I just can't stand your kind. You N-words are just, just dirty people. And then he went on to say, like, put your hands out. And I was looking around and nobody else was paying attention or pretending that it wasn't happening. So I put my hands out to see what he was going to say. And he goes, why are the palms of your hands white and clean and the rest of your body dirty? Did you not wash yourself today? And so, that was the moment where it wasn't just the racism. It wasn't just like the violence in that experience, but it was the way in which people were just bystanders. Not even just that, they were silent. They didn't support me. I was a young girl, and it was a man that was if this was a sexual harassment of some sort, people would be involved. But I don't think people recognize that racism is abuse and racism is violence. So that was one of my first introductions to this community.
Not a very warm one.
No.
No.
And I could share hundreds of thousands of other stories that have happened in this community and why it's led me to this work. But another thing that's always important to understand is that we also don't want to contribute to trauma porn is a term that's used in the community, in communities where oftentimes for example, when we had the council meeting with the region and they asked us to all share our stories, a lot of Black community members and Indigenous community members said, why do you need to hear more of our stories? What more proof do you need?
And why do I need to relive this so you can be shocked and give a shit about it?
There it is.
Right.
That part.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was listening to Toronto Mayor John Tory today talking about Holocaust education.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about how racism can be very subtle. It can start in a very subtle way.
Microaggressions. Yeah. I say Canada offers racism with a smile often, and which is why I'm grateful that I work for myself. And I don't think I could survive working for a corporation. And my heart goes out to racialized folks that do. And I do work with organizations to help them unpack racism and move through that systemic change. But it's a lot, and it's every day. We're in COVID right now, so at least we have a certain level of protection. But I would say I experience, when I am interacting with human beings in the world, I would say I experience racism at least once a day on some level.
And you touched on something earlier where you said that, we like to, as Canadians, we like to say this is a US problem. And we don't like to admit the dirty past of Canada. We were actually just talking about that recently on the podcast where I was saying, I didn't even know about residential schools. This is news to me as the world has sort of been unfolding this. That wasn't something that I was aware of, or I would like to say, the US really needs to get their act together in terms of taking care of Flint, Michigan. And I'm like, oh, we have areas that do not have clean water for Indigenous peoples. Clean water is a basic right. And FYI, it's their water to begin with. We're all just drinking dinosaur pee here, but it is their water from their land. And we're not offering the service that they need to get that water in the areas that people are living in, which is dirty. It's a horrible thing, but we like to say it's a US problem, there's some people are racist, but it's not like that here. That is a very common sentiment, I think, for Canadians.
Oh, yeah. I would say that racism in Canada is even more insidious than it is in the US, because at least in the US, there's conversation, there's open dialogue, there's acknowledgement. And actually, we see in the US, at least Black and Brown people that hold leadership levels, that have been able to move to certain leadership levels to actually facilitate and contribute to systemic changes. I think in Canada, what I see, which is really scary, is the kind of erasing of Black and Indigenous peoples in Canada, and this kind of myth of the model minority. So, for example, Brown folks or Indian folks, people of Indian descent, might be considered we'll hire that person and that's okay. But, we can't imagine a Black or Indigenous person in a level of leadership or even political leadership of some level. And so I think Canada has even more work to do, because Canada has to still, first of all, apologize and acknowledge, the impacts of enslavement of Black people and the cultural genocide, the residential schools that have impacted people today. And there's still so many systemic barriers. We don't collect race-based data, basic things like that are happening in the US, because at least that acknowledgement is there. Perhaps there's still issues, but the acknowledgement that systemic racism is alive, minus the last, President 45 or whatever his name is, he didn't acknowledge it, but there's systems in place to support folks. And I would say that in Canada, when we look at even police brutality, look at conversations around defunding the police, people are really in denial in Canada when really I've had experiences with police brutality and violence. Many of my family members and friends have had it. And
I've had none. I have had zero experiences. And I've been pulled over 3 times in my life for speeding, and they have been my fault. And I was treated with nothing but absolute respect. And to be honest, I was maybe a little mouthy. Really, because I was angry that I was pulled over. That is a fact.
I can see that.
And I feel like Black people, what happens to Black people is like, if you even see police behind you, first of all, you start to sit up a little bit taller. You start to check and make sure that everything's in place. You begin to like go through your mind, like, did I do anything wrong? Let me slow down. Let me do all the things. And then when you do get stopped, you feel panic. And then all of a sudden, and then you try your best to communicate and talk in a way that is like the most respectful. And that's why respectability politics are like such a big conversation now, because in order for us to survive in this society, we constantly have to learn how to make ourselves smaller so that we aren't considered a threat, so we don't die or aren't, violated in some way.
I want to talk about something that I recently learned about just through, the reading and seeing what's on social media and seeing what's going on. I've been following what's happening with Keon Harold in the States and his young child, his 14-year-old son being attacked in a hotel over a cell phone by a white woman who still claims it wasn't her fault and that she was allowed to do that. But one thing, after following up with a little bit of reading that I found out a little bit about, and actually listening to some podcasts, there's a podcast series made by New York Times called Nice White Parents. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but man, everyone should go out and listen to that. That is an eye-opener, the power of white parents in public schools in the U.S. education system. And I would probably say here too, and the U.S. Public education system specifically. But the one thing that really gripped me and shook me around a little bit was white innocence. So I'm not talking about white innocence for us adults. We're usually white adults, like I said earlier, being pulled over was an inconvenience to me, even though I had done something wrong. I'm talking about white innocence where it applies to children. So I don't remember the stats right now, but what I was listening to was saying that a police officer will assume a white child is older than they actually are because innocence belongs to whiteness. Mm-hmm. And as a mother, that breaks my heart. That absolutely breaks my heart. So then after hearing this information and then trying to follow Keon Harold's story, it's amazing how many people were calling his son a young man. He's not, he's a child. And you have a child around the same age, yes? A son?
Yes, he's 15.
Yeah. 15. He's a child. I have a 15-year-old daughter. She's a child. She is not a young woman.
My baby. He's my baby, and he's still mentally like a child.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, that's all I'm really saying is that this is news to me. I did not know this before. Mm-hmm. And of course, I do want to get to talking about your involvement in the Black Lives Matter march this past year also. But the images and the trauma porn and the seeing all this stuff constantly online. Me and my kids are all seeing it over this past year, specifically George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, all these people, but seeing children, young Black children in handcuffs or being thrown to the ground, or these are incredibly disturbing images. And I don't understand why the world isn't getting up and doing something about it. Children are our most valuable resource. We're supposed to protect them. We're supposed to take care of them. They're children, they are just children. And that was news to me. So do you see something similar in policing in Canada, or specifically in Waterloo region, where whiteness equals innocence?
Oh, of course. I see it every day, every moment of the day. I think, for my son, when he was little and small, he was like safer, but the bigger he gets, the taller he gets, the more that he kind of finds his own way of being in the world, and his voice lowers and all that kind of stuff. He is more considered a threat in the world. I think a lot of white parents are often thinking about like, oh, I can't wait till my child gets their driver's license. And I'm like, I want him to have his autonomy, but I'm also terrified. I'm terrified about what that looks like for him in the world. I know it because I've gone through it with police brutality. I mean, thankfully, he has like a very sheltered life, so he spends a lot of time with his family. But I know that that's going to change when he goes out in the world on his own. But he has experienced, racism within schools, and has had many people call him a young man. And I don't understand. I mean, I do understand, but I always try to correct people. And I say, no, actually, he's a boy. He's a kid. He's young. And, and we need to treat him as such. But we have to know that historically, throughout Canada, we know through data and statistics that like Black youth are always are expelled at higher rates. They're suspended at higher rates. They receive higher levels of discipline, punitive action. They're more likely to be funneled into the criminal justice system. A white child, for example, will like do something, disruptive in a class, and they'll look at it from a mental health aspect, or that the person's just being a little, shit or whatever. Yeah. But when it's a Black youth, they see it as a threat, and Black youth are often not given the privilege of being assigned as children, that they're often looked at as adults. And so, yes, it's absolutely happening here. Not to mention, we saw what happened at the Capitol, and we see the extreme polarizing version to that, which is when Black people protest, in peacefully, that we're seen as being divisive, and we're instigating violence or instigating issues. And then when white folks are doing it, they're met with a certain level of privilege.
And what other proof does anyone need that it's a problem from within the highest levels?
Absolutely. And that's why, as polarizing as it may be for some people, defunding the police is not about like taking all the money away from the police.
It's reallocating.
It's reallocating, but it's also recognizing, like, why are you as a police officer coming to my house if I'm having a mental health crisis? Like, you're coming with a weapon, and there's no level of unconscious bias training that you can ever do in your lifetime that's ever going to eliminate 100-year-old conditioning for you to see Black bodies as inferior, but also as a threat to you.
And I just told this story last night when we were talking to Jen Vasic, and my mom struggled with mental health her whole life. She was very sick, and numerous times she was taken to the ER in the back of a cruiser. She always made it there safely, no matter what she was throwing at people, no matter what she was screaming. Her body made it safely into a bed in the ER every single time, with respect.
Absolutely. My sister's a paramedic. She sees it all the time. She sees the level of like abuse officers and paramedics will take on from, white folks that are having a mental health crisis of some sort. Mm-hmm. And the same is not afforded. And we know this because actually, if we look at like organizations that support, for example, in mental health for youth that are going through a mental health crisis of some sort within the education system, we can see clearly that most of their clients, the kids, are white in the mental health aspect. And then the Black and Indigenous youth are all funneled into the criminal justice system. It's very clear. There's no way you can hide it.
I've been talking to Sarah about how I rediscovered a sitcom from my teens that I love, WKRP in Cincinnati, and how important discussions were already happening in this sitcom, which I think is pretty rare. And it wasn't in every single episode or whatever, but it was there along the way. And when I see it now, I think, wow, this show really, the writers really had some good ideas here. Are you able to look back in hindsight at either our pop culture or something where you can see where the work was starting to be done going back decades? Can you think of things that I guess certainly in music, right?
The 90s. I mean, literally the 90s all turned us into like civil rights activists. I would say that music, the movies that we watched, that primarily maybe are like specific to like maybe Black communities, which I think everyone should watch. I can't, that separation is really unfortunate because I think white folks miss out on a whole level, like a whole movement, I think, that happened within hip hop, within reggae, within, huge movies that we used to watch. And I think we learned how to build awareness around police brutality. We learned how to have conversations around our Black identity. I think I'm grateful for that representation, because now when I look at my son, and he was like 4 years old, and he wanted to be white or wanted his hair to, be European white, wanted his name to change. Whereas when we were growing up, there was a lot of reinforcement of like Black identity. And I think we all kind of connected to conversations around Black Panthers and ways in which we could empower ourselves. And then it was like that happened. And then all of a sudden we moved into the era of I don't see color, and we're all just going to exist in this world where these conversations never are at the table. So yeah, I think if we all look back at that time, we can remember that there was a lot happening.
Isn't that the beauty of it? Like, so Black story is being told by Black people. That's the difference, right? Whereas like, in American music history, for instance, like those first rock, blues, R&B, those sounds were being stolen from Black people who were enslaved, from their music, from their gospel, from their singing, from everything that they had, and stolen and then sold. And then that story was told from a white voice of what I think a Black voice is, right? Mm-hmm. So even in our existence, or maybe a couple decades before, maybe then, Black folks got to start telling their own story. But specifically in the 90s with filmmaking and music, I think that you have an amazing point there where the stories are being told by the people with the actual experiences.
Absolutely. And I think I try my best as much as possible to just immerse myself in those types of artists and seek them out more and more, because of the fact that if you just stay in mainstream culture, you will parts of your soul will die, because there's a constant reinforcement of whiteness being better and of Black voices and brown voices, not being valuable, and that kind of dehumanizing within the mainstream culture of stereotyping, Black people. So for me, I have like a whole repertoire of podcasts and voices and music and people that I listen to that continue to reinforce, my journey of healing, of like reconnecting to, my Black identity and, really centering in that.
There was a band, I think they released their first album in 1989, Living Colour.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the sound of Living Colour. And I got to see them open for the Rolling Stones.
Cool.
But I remember there was a lot of talk at that time. I would have been like 18, I guess, about people saying, have you heard Living Colour? They sound like they're white, but they're really Black guys.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating how there's a rock and roll band that they're Black? And there was just
remember that.
A lot of discussion around that. And I can imagine the poor musicians had to answer these questions in interviews and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, I'm glad you did point out the 1990s, though, as a kind of this pivotal time where something started to really shift. Yeah,
even with rock, we were all listening to all of those like heavy metal tracks and alternative tracks we were a little bit more, I think, rebellious in that we were all kind of finding our identities, and it was okay to like root yourself in integrating and learning more about that identity, I think, in the 90s, as opposed to this like kind of assimilation mindset that I often find now.
Thank you for putting a spotlight on that. I hadn't really considered that. Yeah, the 90s is when things started to shift a bit.
I'd go back just for the clothes.
Yeah.
Right?
I had a pretty good wardrobe then. I did a lot of ripped jeans with like short dresses. That was my go-to. And army boots that I would find at like the thrift. It was good times. Really.
I always tell my son, I'm like, we were cool. Like we were
cool. I know. I have my girlfriends tell my kids sometimes, no, your mom's cool, and they don't believe it. So we want to talk a little bit about your work in the Black Lives Matter March last year. This was huge. This ended up being like 36,000 participants, and that was in person and virtual.
Well, 5,000 virtual and 36,000 approximately came out like
plus. So how did this work come to be? Obviously, we all know something had to be said. If Aunt Becky from Full House gets a couple months in a townhouse prison and George Floyd gets his life taken from him, we knew that something had to happen. But how did your involvement start?
Yeah. So for me, I'd already been doing anti-racism work and already been, I did a training the year before, or actually the January before. I'd done a training, and I was working, within the community, doing talks, running the studio. And then basically what happened was COVID happened. all of these atrocities and travesties happened. And I was depressed. I was hurting. I was grieving. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. And the march happened in Toronto. And I finally was like, you know what? We need to do something. Like, something has to happen. So I talked to a friend, Aaron Francis, who's one of the co-organizers in the community. And we talked, and he was like, well, maybe we'll pick a day, like some day. And I was like, no, we need to pick something now, because I need to be able to eat at some point. And I feel like if I don't do something, I'm not going to eat or sleep for another week. And so I called my other friend, business partner, Carla, and I said, what do you think? Let's do a march on Wednesday. And I said, honestly, if 30 people show up, I'm happy. Like, I really don't even actually care. I just want to get out of my house, walk on the street, show my solidarity, and grieve and cry with people who care about, what's happening in the world. And so we were like, okay, let's do it. You do the virtual part. I'll do I'm used to planning events. I've been doing this for a long time. Little did we know that, within a couple of hours, we started collaborating with ACB Network Waterloo Region, with Aqua, with all the different Black community leaders who have been organizing for decades. Thank goodness, because we would have been lost if we didn't have their voice, and helped with the security measures and all of the different factors that would have to happen. So that was a Sunday. And we did the march on Wednesday. So we really had 3 days of, again, not sleeping and eating, so that we could plan and prepare this march and make sure that it was safe, and basically work around the clock to make it happen. What was amazing was that the community came together, and thousands of people reached out with supplies and support. And I mean, it's something that's just unbelievable.
I love that you took your grieving and pain and despair and turned it into some action, turned it into something beautiful and something that people will choose to do again in the future, like something to show that solidarity. I think that's a beautiful thing.
I think Black and Indigenous people have been doing that forever, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we were seeing in the US, regardless of how the media was trying to portray it and curate that narrative. That's what people were doing. They were marching on the streets in grief and in pain and in sorrow, and in saying, like, please stop killing us. And so I think I was just doing what is naturally been done in our communities, which is like, we put things to action. We take our pain and our suffering, and we try to make it beautiful, whether through music, through art, through protesting, through civil rights movements. But really, right now, we're in the largest civil rights movement in history. So we acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And we are situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River.
Hey all, thanks for meeting us in Bonn Park. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on the platform that you're listening to. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bonn Park Podcast. Original music by Alan Lung.